Welcome to this session number 4 in our series on the Anglican tradition. I'm focusing in this series in Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada. One of the great tragedies of our time is that many people have no understanding of the history of Canada, the rich lineaments of the Canadian tradition, the significance of history and its impact on us today, and some of the major men and women within Canada and in the Anglican Church of Canada are not even known. And when, of course, we cease to know anything about history, we become the victims of history. And so this is why we study the significant women and men in history, because in the communion of saints they come to us, they encourage us along, they inform us, they provide us with wisdom. And in that sense, to ignore them, we do so to our peril. If amnesia is probably one of the besetting illnesses of our time, the way we recover from amnesia is by immersing ourselves in the wisdom, the richness, the gold mine of the past. Many who are Anglicans today know very, very little about the significant women and men in the Anglican Church of Canada. And earlier in this series, I've talked about War of 1812, the significance of Bishop John Strachan. He's often ignored in what we call the authorized reading of Canadian history, Anglican history, that just sort of wipes out, cleans the slate in that terms of the Canadian way. And Bishop John Strachan was a part of what we call the family compact, and within the liberal read of history, they're seen as people we must leave behind. They were oppressive. They were people that prevented Canada from really being like good Americans, William Lyon Mackenzie King types. And so the story forward in the Anglican Church of Canada is really the story forward of the significant figures like Bishop John Strachan. And in John Strachan's period, you had the arrival of the Oxford movement in England, and many of the Anglicans in eastern Canada and the Maritimes were very affected by the Oxford movement, the revival, the renaissance of Catholic Anglicanism in Canada. And the Maritimes played a very significant role in bringing to the Anglican Church of Canada a deeper, a fuller understanding of Catholic Anglicanism. I mention this today because some of the things which are happening in the Church of England is a particular group called Radical Orthodoxy. Radical Orthodoxy emerged in the early 1990s. John Milbank is a significant figure in that movement. I spent time with John Milbank at Peterhouse when I was there in the early 1990s. Radical Orthodoxy, like C.S. Lewis, who I had mentioned earlier, is very concerned with the drift and direction of large elements of modernity. And they are trying to reclaim a Catholic Orthodox way within the Anglican Communion, within the Church of England, and within larger elements of the great tradition of which we know in the history of the Church. It is significant that radical orthodoxy, in attempting to reclaim a Catholic mystical way of knowing against a hyper-rationalism that we find in various forms of Protestant confessionalism, or a reactive pietism that does not seriously want to deal with the mystical and the deeper reflective elements of faith, was inspired to a greater or lesser degree by the work of George Grant in Canada. In correspondence I have had with John Milbank, he very clearly makes specific that George Grant, the well-known Canadian Red Tory, has had an impact on the rise of the radical Orthodox movement. And so these ties are often ignored. And so when we think of C.S. Lewis's impact on George Grant's impact on the radical tradition within the Church of England, we can begin to see a highway going back and forth in terms of a renaissance of Catholic Anglicanism, in terms of its critique of the modern project and how that modern project has increasingly led to a fragmentation in the Church, and hence a weakening of the Church. Divided we fall, united we stand. And at the heart of a radical orthodoxy is a getting to the roots of faith. And at the heart of those roots, in fact, is a call for the Church to return to its historic fullness in the period of the councils, the periods of the creeds, and these particular mother lode of the faith. And so when we think of Anglicanism, radical orthodoxy in George Grant, we can now begin to see the significance of George Grant, one of the most important Anglicans in the Anglican Church of Canada in the 20th century, now feeding back into the Church of England, a radical orthodoxy in which Grant inherited from C.S. Lewis and now in many ways has passed on to radical orthodoxy in England.